Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today I'm going to show you how I made this card for my daughter's birthday. I really love how the inside and outside coordinate and how the entire thing looks. And as we go today, we're going to be using a lot of older supplies. So as you're watching me, I want you to think about what you have in your stash that will work in place of what I'm using. Or maybe you want to go with a different theme, but training your mind to think about what you already have is going to make this hobby very sustainable and make you happy with your collection you've amassed so far. The first thing we need to do is make a card base. Now you can purchase these already made with envelopes. I do find the pre-made ones you can get at the craft store to be a bit flimsy, but there's nothing wrong with starting off with those, especially since it's pretty inexpensive. But I like to go with heavyweight cardstock, and this is the Park Lane heavyweight cream cardstock from Joann's. Michael's also has a heavyweight cardstock, and you can always order it online, but I find that waiting for a sale at a big box store is a much better deal. Staples even has some decent heavyweight cardstock that you can use, but honestly use what you have. And then I just get the 5x7 envelopes. So to take a 7-inch by 10-inch piece of cardstock and fold it in half is how you get that 5x7 card. It's also known as an A7 if you're buying the cards and envelopes together at like Michael's or whatnot. And then I cut a panel that is 4.5 by 6.5 to be my layering. Now this stamp is by Technique Junkies, and I have a couple of stamps by them that are collage style stamps. I'm going to show you how I use them, because sometimes I feel like when I have a collage size stamp that all the work is done for me and all the fun is done for me, but this is a way that I like to use them. I like to use a curved stamp block for these large backgrounds because it makes sure that I get a really good impression. And now I'm using clear embossing ink to ink up my stamp. Now the great thing about clear embossing ink is that you can leave it on your stamp and the glycerin in the ink will condition your stamp and keep it soft and supple. So I've got two collage stamps here that kind of coordinate. So I'm going to stamp one on the bottom half of my card panel here, and I'll stamp the other on the top. And you're probably wondering why I'm stamping in clear ink. Well, I'll show you in just a second. This is one of my favorite stamping techniques. It's called poppin' pastels, and basically what you do is you take either a little pom-pom or a sponge or a brush and you apply pastels over a clear embossed image, and the pastel dust is just going to stick to the clear embossing powder. So it works great. You have plenty of time to do this, so once you stamp your image, you have, you can wait 5 or 10 minutes and the pastel will still stick to that clear sticky ink that we've put down. Now I'm using an iridescent pastel. These are by Pebbles. I'm not sure if they're still available, but you can even take like a Q-tip or a eyeshadow brush on stick pastels, and this is going to work. So it's just going to be the kind of dusty, chalky pastels, or sometimes they're called decorator chalks, and it just is so pretty. You just rub it over your design. And then once you have the entire design covered with pastel, you rub over it with a tissue, a clean, dry tissue to lock everything in. And I find that I don't even need to spray it with fixative. It still will stay. And this is a great way when you want to combine a bunch of different images, but you don't want it to look junky or awkward. This just looks seamless. It's such an ethereal look, and it is so pretty. To add a little bit more interest to this background, I'm going to overstamp another design. I love this kind of flourishy image from Impression Obsession, and I'm going to go right over that background. And I'm going in at an angle, and I'm going to kind of gently pick up as I get to the edge so that I can minimize the line. And then I'm just going to go in and stamp again on the other end just to try to fill that background. This background 6 inches by 6 inches, and I'm trying to cover a 4.5 by 6.5 panel, so I do need to do it a couple of times. And then I'll just kind of go in and try to finesse a little bit more design in. But the neat thing about this is you can take two backgrounds that you already have in your stash that maybe you're sick to death of using and layer them up and get a completely different look this way. So I highly recommend this technique anytime you're just trying to build your own backgrounds. I found that I much prefer to make my own pattern paper than to buy it, and then I always can make something that's going to coordinate with the rest of my card because I'm choosing the colors. I'm inking the edges just to give it a little bit of a border or frame, and that's really going to make it pop against the white card base because this paper I printed on is the same color as the card base, so this is going to give it a little bit of a separation. A great way to stretch your card making supply stash is to repeat a stamped element. So I'm taking one of these background stamps that I used for the background, one of these collage stamps, and I'm going to stamp it and do a technique called spotlighting. So what I've done here is just inked it up in Ranger Archival ink in brown, which is a nice crisp color. Then I'm just putting a piece of kind of an ivory cardstock down on it, and I'm just going to rub over the back of it. Now this is going to give me a really good impression. Sometimes you're stamping on a table that's not totally flat, or you've got a really detailed image and you want to get a really good design. And I find putting the cardstock down on the inked rubber gives you a better impression. Now look how crisp that is. I'm just going to do some very simple coloring here. I've base coated the butterfly with a light pink, and I'm going in with a darker pink to shadow. You can use any colored pencils for this. They do not have to be fancy. And I'm just kind of coloring this small area that I want to die cut. I didn't even know I was going to use the entire panel at this point, but this technique is also called spotlighting if you want to just take a small area, color it, and leave the rest of the area blank, which can be a really nice effect for a clean and simple card. So if I was going to do that, what I'd probably do is draw a circle around the area that I want to color with it in the circle, and then leave the rest of it just plain. And that's a really pretty effect if you want to do just a one layer card that looks great with any collage stamps. For this though, I wanted to use a postage stamp frame and square die cut. So I'll be using the square die cut out of this, and then I'll cut a postage frame out of something else and just layer it up for the front of my card. But then I realized that I was going to have all this beautiful leftover space, and it was going to be pretty neatly arranged that I'd be able to use that on the inside of my card. So I ended up being able to save both parts. Now you can see my dies that are there on screen. I'm just keeping there for reference, and I just every once in a while lay the die over and see what is going to be visible so that I don't end up coloring a bunch of area that I really don't need to. By the way, if you don't have a die cut machine, you can always use a paper trimmer to trim something into a square, and then you can use decorative edge scissors to cut out a border. So don't feel like you have to buy a machine if you want to get a very similar look. So I'm just going to adhere this cardstock colored piece to a piece of just kind of cream or ivory cardstock that I have die cut, and I'm going to set that aside. That's going to coordinate with our background really well though, because when I chose my colored pencil colors, I made sure that it was going to match the kind of pastel colors that I used on the background. So just set that aside. So I want to make another embellishment. This time I thought I would make some faux postage that's been very popular lately. And I've got this grid stencil here from my sketchbook Floozy launch, and I'll link to that in the video description, along with any of the other products or suggestions that I've made. But like I said, use what you have. I'm going to tape this down over a piece of white cardstock so that I have a nice stable base, and that's going to keep things from moving as I ink stuff up. And I'll also use Post-it notes to protect the border around the 3x4 grid that I will be inking up. That way I'll have some area that I can hang on to after I'm done inking, and also a little bit of a border that I can cut with my aforementioned decorative edge scissors, which get pulled out all the time when I'm card making. If you like a tool, don't get rid of it just because it's not trendy anymore. It's still perfectly useful, so use what you have. After you've protected the edges, it's time to get inking, and you can use whatever sort of method you like for putting ink onto your cardstock. I'm going to be using some blending brushes, but sponges are totally fine. I know different inking methods go in and out of fashion, so use whatever you like. I'll be using primary-ish colors, so I'll have this kind of turquoisey blue and a kind of warm yellow and also a pinky pink color. And that way where they overlap, they'll make pretty muted secondary colors, and they shouldn't make too much mud. You don't want it to go with too many colors here because you could get a muddy effect. And when in doubt, you could choose tones that are close to each other on the color wheel, and you'll always get a fresh result when you do that. But don't do too many colors, or you'll just end up getting kind of a murky, muddy mess. And feel free to work back and forth with the colors to get the blend just the way you want it. And if I'm using Distress Oxides, I do wash my brushes afterwards. If I'm using regular Distress inks or any dye-based inks, I don't bother washing my brushes. So that'll just kind of keep your supplies ready to go whenever you are ready to use them. I want this to look like a sheet of postage stamps, so I'm going to do a little bit of stamping in each grid, and I decided it would be easiest just to do the same image repeated over and over. And I chose this little butterfly because it fits the image perfectly, and I'll be using other butterfly themed products throughout. So I'm just kind of lining my stamp up so that I can line the corner of the block with each of the grids, and I'm going to go and stamp this in every single one of the grids using brown ink. I thought that looked kind of plain, so I decided to get some swirls that I had in my binder with all my other bug stamps basically, and stamp a few swirls and build kind of a pattern over top of the stencil grid. Now keep in mind the stencil is still down, so when I stamp over everything, I'm not getting ink in the borders in between my little butterflies there. So yeah, just basically filled up the space with a layer of stenciled swirlies in blue, and it added quite a bit of character to it, I think. To make this really look like a postage stamp, I wanted to put a price, so I stamped 25 cents in the corner of each of these stamps, and then I used a script stamp to add even more pattern and texture to the background. Now I know it may look a little chaotic when you're seeing all of this stuff all piled up, but trust me, when we take the stencil away, it's going to have a lot more order. You're going to have those nice, clean, crisp borders, and all of that good texture and interest and pattern that you've put down is really going to look fantastic. And if you don't like it when you take the stencil off, you're only out a piece of paper and a little bit of ink. So it's really worth it to experiment. Your stamps are going to last you years and years and years, hundreds and hundreds of uses. So you're not going to wear them out. Just experiment and learn how they work best for your style. And I also want to add that a lot of times these things you're stamping are really unrecognizable when you're all done. I have this kind of embroidery flower here from my background set, and I am stamping that kind of hither and thither over the background, and it's not going to read as a flower per se when we're done, but it's giving it a little bit extra color, giving it a little bit extra pattern. It's nature-y, so it goes with the butterflies, and it works. It's amazing how well things like this just work out. I really like that pink, and I wanted more pink in the design, but the pink wasn't standing out too well. So what I did was I pressed the pink ink pad onto a clear block to make a palette, and now I'm taking some white gouache and a watercolor brush and some water, and I'm basically just going to make myself some paint to spatter on the background. That's going to bring in that color. It's going to be opaque because of the gouache I've added in there, and it's going to give another pattern, give us another little spot of color, spot of texture, spot of pattern, and I really like it. If you don't like spatters, don't do it, but it's just to give you an idea of some other things you can do to liven up your homemade embellishments. I think that's part of the thing of card making that I enjoy. It's making these little embellishments and making cards that aren't going to look exactly like anyone else's. And when you're doing a background like this, you can't help but make it different because you have different supplies, your hand is a different hand, your style's a different style. It's going to look like you, and that's what's really nice about card making. Make sure your paper is completely dry before you go ahead and remove the Post-it notes and the stencil. You can speed things up with a hairdryer or a heat tool. Just make sure you don't overheat the stencil because you could warp it. It is just plastic after all. And when you've removed all of that, you get to see the product of your hard work, and I just think it looks so pretty. And even though there's a little bit of ink smudge on the edges, that's going to be trimmed off when we use our decorative scissors. So set that aside, let it fully dry, and we'll start it on the envelope. If you have the time and inclination, decorating the envelope is such a beautiful touch to add to any handmade card. Or you can even make envelopes out of pattern paper, and that's really pretty to do as well. I'm using this craft envelope. I buy them in bulk because, you know, sometimes you just need an envelope. And I'm stamping this butterfly from Personal Stamp Exchange. They were such a beautiful stamp company. They went out of business a long time ago, but I still cherish the stamps I have from them. And then I've got this little generic butterfly I put in the top, and I think the bottom one is either Stampin' Up or Personal Stamp Exchange. I'm not 100% sure, but if you buy things that you like, then they're going to go together because they'll be your style. If you buy things because of trends, then chances are once the trend has gone past, you're not going to like the product anymore. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're adding to your collection. When you're coloring on craft, using a pastel toned color pencil works really well. They have a lot of white in them, so they really pop against the craft background, and I think they look so sweet. You can use any wax-based color pencil for this for great results, and even oil-based color pencils will work good too. Seriously, get what you have out and see how it works before you think about buying new pencils. You can buy sets of pencils that are only pastel tones as well, which can really amplify the use of the pencils you already have. And I find that most brands will work together. So don't feel like you have to be a brand loyalist if you want to try something different, or maybe your budget doesn't allow for, your preferred brand, but you want to get that idea. I know that the Brute Funer Macaron pencils work beautifully. So if you're looking for a budget pastel tone, that's a great option. I want to add a little bit of pattern over this. And because I colored with colored pencils, I know I can wipe off some of that ink if I want to. I'm using the Distress Oxide. I believe it's like in either frayed burlap or linen or something. It's a very, very kind of creamy pastel color. And then I'm using the pink that I used on the card itself to do this strip of happy birthday wishes words. And I thought that would be really nice just along the edge, especially since the big background I have is not large enough to cover the whole envelope in one go. That way I don't have to try to match up anything, and I can kind of piece together two pieces. And the neat thing about a stamp like that long strip with all the happy birthday things is you can stamp it out and cut apart all the sentiments to have a bunch of sentiments, or you can use it as a background like I did here, or you could just kind of ink up 1 or 2 words and just stamp that portion of it. Stuff like that is really useful. So when you're looking at stamps to add to your stash, or you're looking at the products you have, think about different ways you can use it. And I've heard some good advice that some stampers will try to think of at least 3 or 5 or 7 ways they'll use a stamp set before they purchase it. So that's a great way to make a good investment when you're thinking of adding to your stash. And as a final touch, I decided to carry the theme from the front of the card over by adding some spatter onto my envelope as well. Now we're going to turn our stenciled grid into some faux postage. Now there are dies and there are lots of different things you can use to make faux postage stamps, but what I'm using here is my scoring board and this little tool that's called a scoring bug or a piercing bug. Basically it's got a wheel with little spikes on it, and you can roll it over a project and make little holes. You could also use a tailor's wheel, like a pattern transfer wheel for this. You could use any sort of pokey tool and just poke a row of holes. Look around your stash, see what you can find that will work, and go that way. Or I know Waffle Flower actually makes a postage stamp die that's like does a whole sheet of like postage stamps. So that might be an option too if you're looking to go a little bit more professional with a look. But I think this looks really nice. And then once you have poked all the holes, you can use your decorative edge scissors, and mine are from way back in the day. They're by Fiskars. I highly recommend Fiskar decorative edge scissors if you're going to buy some, because they just seem to cut the most smoothly and work the best. I don't know if they still make them, but you can always find them in like a Facebook Marketplace ads or thrift shops. Because it seems like everybody had them back in the day. So they're definitely out there to be found. And that just gives you a really nice border. Now you could also use the decorative edge scissors to just cut all of the pieces down into little postage stamp sized embellishments, and that would be fine too. But I did want to keep some together and use them as like a strip or a panel in different projects. So do whatever you like. You can even tear the stamps apart when you have the poked holes, and it will be kind of like the old gummed stamps, kind of that look. So really, the sky's the limit. Look at what you have and alter a project to fit the supplies you have on hand. I jump around a lot while I'm working on a card. I'll go from the making embellishments to doing the envelope, and now I'm working on the inside of the card. And here we have that background piece. Remember, I had cut out the spotlight image to be a focal point on the front of the card. This is a leftover piece, and I thought it was just too pretty to throw away. So I found this birthday definition stamp from way back in the day, and I'm going to stamp that in the middle of the frame opening. I thought that would look really cute and take up some of the real estate inside this card. Make sure you give the ink plenty of time to transfer from the rubber stamp onto your paper. The biggest mistake I see people make is lifting the stamp off too quickly. I somehow managed to get an ink smudge on the inside of my card, so luckily I had some book paper lying around that I thought would be perfect for covering it up. And hey, just remember, a mistake is just an opportunity for embellishment, and that's what I did here in this corner. And it will be layering up more stuff too, but sometimes you just need to give your eyes a break from one part of the card before you go and work on the other part. So I decided to go back to the front of the card and start working on that, since I don't have anything done there. And I'm bringing over my stamped panel that I made, the background paper basically, and my focal point. And then I was kind of disappointed because I'm like, I did all that work and that's all it looks like. And then I thought, oh, okay, we've got my my faux postage. Now, how do I want to do that? I don't want to cover up too much of the background because that took some time. That was so pretty. So I'm just trying to decide what to do. The postage stamp panel was just too big to go on my card, so I wanted to kind of tear off a strip of the stamps or maybe a couple of the stamps just to make it a little bit smaller, but I was afraid I was going to rip that cardstock because it is pretty thick. So I went in with my scissors and trimmed off a strip after poking it first with the holes to try to make it a little bit more tearable. Not terrible, terrible, but terrible as if I can tear them apart. And then I just kind of went in with my fingernail and tried to make the holes look a little bit more like the postage stamp perforations, basically. I felt that the card needed some texture or something tactile on it. So I have these strips of fabric, and honestly what they are is they're just strips of fabric. I had bought some bags of like scraps at a quilting shop. They were cut with rotary cutter into really thin strips for certain projects, but they were perfect for a card embellishment. And I got like a bag of like coordinating colors for $1 a bag. So they are like my favorite things to use on cards, but really all they are is just strips of like quilter's cotton fabric, but they tie really well, they lay really flat, they're very easy to work with, and I just grabbed 2 of them together and then just tied them in a knot and then trimmed the excess. At this point, the card comes together pretty quickly. I'm putting some adhesive back on that panel that we just wrapped with ribbon or with cloth, and I'm going to center that up on the panel. Now, I did have a little bit of a raggedy edge on the side, so I'm just going to kind of run my fingernail over that and just kind of smooth it down a bit, and then just try to center it up as good as I can. Don't worry if it's not perfect. Sometimes our cutters are off or our eyeballs are off. I don't know. Sometimes we trim things that are not perfect, but honestly, your recipient probably will not notice. I love how that coordinates because we started off with the same color paper for the panel and the background, and it's subtle, there's enough contrast, but it looks good. And now I'm just working with my placement. So take a little bit of time and fuss things around a little bit, see how they're going to look best, and then you can glue them down. Especially these big elements. You want to it's like putting rocks in a jar. You're going to put your biggest rocks in first, and then your smaller pebbles, and then your fine grains of sand, and then your water, right? So you go biggest to littlest. Because if you can get those big elements to work and to fit, it's going to be easier to piece the smaller ones around. It's harder to find room for those big pieces once you start to glue stuff down. So you want to work big to little, and it will make your design process go so much easier. I like to connect the elements from the outside of the card to the inside of the card, so we're actually going to pop back into the center. I'm using my poker tool to just try to perforate one of those little postage stamps from my main panel. Again, like I said, it's cardstock, so it doesn't really want to tear as easily as like a stamp would. And once I got the holes poked, I'm actually just going to cut it out so I don't rip it by mistake. And we'll use that to embellish the inside. I go back and forth because I find that it keeps everything really cohesive, and it's just a nice effect when you're looking from the inside to the outside of the card. When you're embellishing a card, you want to not overdo it. You don't want embellishments to steal the show, but you do want everything to support the designs you've already done. So I didn't want to cover up a bunch of the background, so I'm using a vellum sentiment. It's a golden happy birthday on vellum, and I'm going to adhere it with just a little drop of glue, and then I'm going to put a button over the glue so that you can't really see where it's glued down. It's just a really subtle, pretty look. And now I'm digging through my die cut basket. So anytime I have like some leftover die cuts from a project or packaged die cuts that I've bought, or it could be just really anything I've saved that I thought would be a pretty card embellishment, I throw them in this basket. And then sometimes when I see them all together, then I'll see 2 next to each other and it will spark an idea. But that basket's always changing with different die cuts, with different little ephemera pieces, and it's kind of fun to flip through it, and I always find something, and it's always something that I didn't think of adding. So I like that little bit of serendipity there from the random die cut basket. I find that embellishments look best when they're kind of overlapping one another, tucked in here or there. Connecting elements or elements that touch and overlap just seem to look more visually pleasing. I'm not exactly sure why that is, but that's usually what I try to do. I try to cluster things together, tuck things under ribbon. I don't know, I just think it looks a little bit more together. It's like nestled in, and I just really like the look of that. I'm always surprised at how long I spend just kind of pushing paper around on my card designs until I get it just right. But that's also a really fun part of the process. I think it's very meditative and enjoyable. So don't rush. Give yourself the time to really enjoy your project making. This glue here, it's called Loctite. It's actually a super glue, but the reason I really like it is that it's thick, kind of like a gel, and it is so easy to squeeze out just a teeny amount. I struggle with glues kind of over globbing and just being a pain and oozing out, and that glue has been such a, I want to say game changer, but I think that's such an overused phrase, but I enjoy it so much, and it's only about $4 for a container on Amazon, and I've been using that one for a couple months, and it hasn't gone dry on me, which is pretty miraculous. So there's a recommendation if you have a hard time dealing with other bottles of glue for embellishments. It's really fantastic. The front of the card looks done to me. I do want to add a little bit more in the inside of the card, and this little bird die cut was actually, I think, a Dollar Tree stamp that I had stamped on cardstock and cut out with my scan and cut machine, but then I didn't have a project for it, so into the random bin it went, and it was perfect for embellishing this. I also have some rolls of washi tape that are actually postage stamps, and I like to use those for embellishing too. And then I did go in with a couple more strips of washi tape and a couple more of those washi tape postage stamps to embellish the inside, and I think this looks so great with this custom envelope, and it was just so much fun to make. Feel free to use what you have, make substitutions. A lot of these products are no longer available, but if they are, I'll link them in the video description. Please give me a thumbs up before you go, and share this video with a friend who loves card making. Thanks for watching. Until next time, happy crafting.